Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Akar. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. In today's episode, I chat with Charles Walker. Charles is a licensed therapist and owner of Custom Life Solutions based in Long Beach, California. Charles understands that life's ups and downs can bring about stress that is difficult to navigate on your own. So he's determined to help his clients restore balance and provide them with the necessary tools to live a life that's more fulfilling, uplifting, and enjoyable. Let's go check out his story. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Charles Walker. Charles is a mental health therapist with experience working in community mental health, psychiatric hospitals, and correctional facilities. Now, he owns and operates Custom Life Solutions in Long Beach, California. So I'm really excited to feature him during our mental health series. So hi, Charles. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So prior to us, talking about your practice, we'll definitely get to that. Talk to us a little bit about, you, your upbringing, really what led you to start working in the mental health field.
It's a long story, but honestly, I grew up in a two-parent household, good parents. Mother was an attorney, father as a retired LAPD detective. I always thought that I was going to be an attorney. I thought I was going to be the next, Jerry Maguire, being the sports agent, or being today's Rich Paul, the agent of LeBron James. But things didn't really work out that way, of course. In your 20s, you're really trying to find out who you are as it pertains to your purpose or your careers. So after graduating from Hampton University for my undergrad, I went through a series of jobs trying to find out who I was. Market crashed in 2008, 2009. I remember being a security guard because there was just no work out there. And I had a bachelor's degree as a security guard. Nothing wrong with security. Shout out to those security guards. Nothing wrong with it. But I remember like it was yesterday, man, where it was 2 a.m. and I was working and I just started crying, weeping. I'm like, wow, what's happening? I remember saying these words like, God, there must be more to my life than this. And I prayed. And I remember it was yesterday, like watching one of those cartoons when an idea pops up. It was like a cloud that popped up, like a light bulb popped in. It was like, hey, go back to school and reinvent yourself. So I started writing down all the strengths that I thought I possessed. And it all led me to getting my, social work. Now, social work, there's a big stigma about, social workers, all they do is take people's kids. But my sister, she's 3 years younger than me. She was majoring in social work as an undergrad. So I went and called her. I said, hey, I'm thinking about social work, but I don't want to take anyone's kids. She was like, no, you dummy. You could do X, Y, and Z with it. You could do therapy. You can do HR. You can do community advocating. You can work for the Department of Mental Health and so forth. I said, wow, okay. So I decided to go the therapy route because I just felt like I'm a problem solver. I like to listen, and I just want to help people. And so I got into the University of Southern California, fight on Trojans, and here I am. Now I've navigated through, different agencies and have different experiences as a therapist, but now I have my own private practice.
No, that's awesome to hear. Now, prior to launching your practice, tell us a little bit about that journey, about that work journey.
Well, honestly, when I first graduated from USC, I worked at a community mental health agency called Tested Cleveland, and I had a mentor there named Moses Chadwick, rest in peace. He really taught me a lot about his journey. He was working for the county of Los Angeles. He decided to leave the county after 25 or something years of on the job. He started his agency at age 65. Now they have 5 or 6 locations in LA County. So I learned a lot from there. Of course, when you graduate from getting your master's in social work, you have to do 2 years and 4 months of clinical work to build your hours so that you can get your licensing. So then you have to take a 4-hour exam. So I took my 4-hour exam and I became licensed. But prior to that, I worked at a psychiatric hospital. I worked at a medical hospital. I worked in the jails. And now, like I said, I work in, my private practice.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So want to take you back a little bit now. Let's go back to March of 2020 when COVID really happens. And I feel like that's, it's a pivotal moment, obviously, for the show. It's one of the origins of how the show even got started, right? But I think especially as we're focused in this mental health space, a lot of things start really getting highlighted in that regard because of COVID. So talk a little bit about how the pandemic really affected you.
The pandemic the pandemic for me, it wasn't like other people. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people, passed away. I caught the original COVID in June of 2020. So that was hard. I was working in the jails at the time. But for social workers, seeing that we were essential workers, we were always being offered jobs everywhere. I remember one guy offered me to fly out to like New York to be a part of the, where New York was where that was the epicenter. They wanted me to go out there and just be in the hospital settings there, and they were going to pay a pretty penny for me to be out there. I didn't go because I was like, I have a family out here. I didn't really know anything really what was going on with COVID. I didn't know what was going on. So I stayed home and did what I can in the hospitals and the jails the jail and the hospitals that I was working at the time. So the pandemic for me, I honestly saw an increase in work and pay. But also during the pandemic is when I started my private practice. I feel like the pandemic for a lot of people allowed them to reassess their life, but also find different ways on how they can manage. It forced people to find different things on how to manage. It was either sink or swim. It was either sink or swim. So a lot of people went back to finding out, what they used to love to do when they were a kid, like hobbies, and they try to monetize that, or some people started their own business, such as myself.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I noticed you started your practice in October of 21. So what was it like really starting your practice during that time, right? The pandemic was still going on pretty strong at that point. So what was it like?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can tell you, I remember like it was yesterday, Saturday. I went to get my car washed, and I was like, I'm gonna get my car washed. I didn't want to wait to get it washed. So I went across the street. I went across the street to Chili's, and they had opened up a little bit, and a woman sat next to me, and she struck up a conversation. She was a licensed marriage family therapist, and she asked me, she says, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a licensed therapist, and she says, do you have your own private practice yet? I said, no, but I always wanted to. She literally taught me the game, taught me how to do it within an hour or two. No, I would say 2 hours. And I went immediately home. I remember telling my wife, I was all excited, hey, I met this woman. She told me about how she got started and so forth. And that weekend I started my website. I sent it on my paperwork, and that week to get my name solidified. I remember signing up for Psychology Today. The next thing I know, I got my first client, second client, and it just increased rapidly. I was like, whoa. So I was like, okay, I want to be able to see my clients, but also do virtual. So I remember I have another mentor, Dr. Wendy Talley, and she allowed me to use her offices to see clients until I found my footing, until I found out, where I want to go with my private practice. So I'm thankful. I'm always thankful for her for allowing me to use her office and get really started.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And kudos to the woman at Chili's who, like you said, just kind of laid it out for you. You need people like that to really get you going. So I love hearing stuff like that. So now you start your practice during this time. Like you said, you sign up for Psychology Today. Clients are coming in. What were some of the trends that you started to notice with those early clients that you started to see?
There was a lot of couples, and there was a lot of single mothers who wanted me to give their sons therapy. The one thing that happened during the pandemic was this: the divorce rates went up, alcoholism went up, child abuse went up. So you have all these people struggling in their relationship and they're trying to get right. So I started getting a lot of couples. I started therapy, talking to little young boys, because kids who were social at one time during the pandemic became a recluse. They stopped really wanting to go out, and the parents just wanted them to get back to their baseline, get back to who they were, and so forth. So my job was to try to find ways on how to reconnect them to society, get them back to their baseline, get them back to, being who they once were. And then, of course, with the couples, trying to get them back to be how they used to be.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so what were some of the things you see this, right? Like you said, divorce rates are going up, child abuse is going up, and alcoholism is going up. So when we think about those things, what were some of the learnings that you started to take away from these increasing rates of those three things we just mentioned?
Well, like I said, with substance abuse, well, one of the things was, I'm like, man, if a pandemic ever happens, I need to invest in alcohol or whatever, because the people are buying that. But on the serious note, when it comes to substance use, it was due to all the stress that was going on in the home. Thinking about it, a lot of men, they don't like staying home when they're to work. Why? Because they like going to the job. It kind of gives them like a break from the home life, whatever the case is. So now during the pandemic, you're in this one setting with the kids, with your wife or girlfriend, whoever, and you're there 24/7. It's chaotic. What happens? Domestic violence is start happening, physical child abuse, but then people start taking to the bottle more to cope with their issues. Now, in certain cultures, such as African Americans and Latino cultures, a lot of men don't even like talking about their feelings. So they don't really go to therapy. A lot of times a woman drags us to therapy. So during the pandemic, if you're a person that doesn't like talking about your feelings, but you're used to just, what do? You find other things to numb your feelings. You find other things to cope. So people start taking to the bottle more, or smoking marijuana, or so forth, or doing other drugs. As it pertains to couples, what I was learning was it was just more of a increased clashing of the two. Just constant clashing. Some men felt like they weren't being heard, or they felt like they were pulling. Of course, they were stressed when it comes to finances. So that was always a big thing. And of course, when there's high stress, a person can become depressed. Then now physical needs aren't being met. And it's a domino effect.
No, definitely. And so looking back, what's one thing you would have done differently during the pandemic, either in your practice or individually?
There's different things that you can learn while you're starting your own business. Of course, you take your lumps, and you also take your wins as they come. I guess just being more, like I said, I really just jumped into it. I just went head first into it. I just figure like, okay, if I make mistakes, I'll recover, because I'm just resilient like that. But I would just probably taken a step back, did a little bit more research, figure a couple things out on how I want to navigate it to start. What I learned about myself in the pandemic was that I was just resilient. I was hungry. You know what? I found out that I got tired of working for people. I got tired of doing the same routine over and over and over. And even now, yes, I have my own private practice. I'm contracted with different agencies and so forth to see people. And eventually I want to be full time, just doing everything. But, and that time will come. I figure if my mentor started his agency at 65, I'm starting mine at 38. Or at that time, 36, 37. then I still have a lot of room, to learn and catch up and just work.
So when we opened up this episode mentioning custom life solutions, right? So tell us more about your practice, the types of services in which you specialize.
Oh, absolutely. Custom life solutions, personalized therapy that you can trust. It's one of those. I specialize in depression, anxiety, working with couples, of course. I do have some clients that are on a higher level of when it comes to diagnosing, like bipolar 1 or schizophrenia. I do have a couple clients like that, but I work with young adults, adolescents, kids. I don't have too many elderly adults, but most of my clients are from the ages of like 8 to 44.
Okay. And you mentioned something that I think is interesting. I wanted to just kind of expound on, and it's really about anxiety, right? And we follow each other on LinkedIn. We met on LinkedIn, right? And so anxiety has always really been this prevalent issue, but it's really been highlighted tremendously over these past few years. So I wanted to read you a stat and really get some of your thoughts, right? So, and I'll read this because I don't want to butcher it, right? So it says general anxiety disorder affects 6.8 million adults, which is basically 3.1% of the U.S. population. Yet only 43.2% are receiving treatment, according to the National Institute of Mental Health. And if we dig a little deeper, only 25% of African Americans seek mental help when needed. So hearing that, and obviously you're probably familiar with these things, but for the listeners who may not know that, what are some of your thoughts on why so little people seek treatment for things such as anxiety?
Well, like I said, it comes down, sometimes it's the culture. I know I've had clients that were Latino who were afraid to let their parents know that they're in treatment, or in certain cultures it looks down. Mental health is looked down on. Especially when you're talking about African Americans and Latinos, we're a very spiritual people. So we believe like, hey, let's pray about it, let's give it to God, which is, I'm a firm believer in God also. But we all know that God also uses people as vessels. A vessel can be a therapist to help get you to another to help you with your stressors. So I think that a lot of times, for men naturally, we internalize a lot. I always tell people this: most people have a kitchen trash can. When your trash can gets full, you take it out. If your trash can was full and you kept putting stuff in it, it's going to overflow. So think about it like this: a lot of men, we tend to stuff things inside, internalize things, and then eventually get to a point where we overflow. Overflow can look different for everybody. You can either start having suicidal thoughts. You can verbally lash out at someone or physically lash out at someone. You can withdraw, isolate, become depressed. These are all just symptoms of feeling overwhelmed, feeling depressed, or getting to that point. So a lot of times we tend to internalize things. We look down on there's a mental health stigma out there. So that's where I see the reasons why people sometimes don't seek therapy. Family, they don't believe it. But here's the thing: other cultures do. I get a lot of Caucasian kids come to me, or parents that come to me for therapy. They love therapy. But when it comes to people of color, at times, I feel like a lot of us, I think right now there's kids in schools, they're teaching more of the therapy. Like, oh, therapy is good. So a lot of kids are learning about therapy now. So we were talking about people like my age or in their 40s. Some of them, a lot of them still don't come to therapy because they think that they'll be either, that's for the crazy people. There's a stigma.
Yeah. And it's one of the things, I've talked about it with some other guests too throughout this series, about how the stigma of mental health with, let's just say, later millennials, right, and later millennials and above, boomers and traditionalists are definitely there, but that some of the Gen Zers and maybe younger millennials are a bit more open. And you see these things like Instagram, TikTok, and all of that. And so it's good to see some of these cycles being broken out in the open, right? There's one other thing I'm curious about with you too, because I've noticed some posts, and we talked about this in one of our calls. There's often this push for more Black male therapists in the field. And I've talked with other practitioners, and we had a great conversation on, the breakdown, the demographic breakdowns of therapists in the nation. And so when I think about Black male therapists, there's even fewer and fewer, right? So how have you navigated this type of need with your availability? Because you're just one person, right? And I would imagine, being a Black male therapist, you may be in high demand, right? Given folks who are looking for that. But how do you navigate this need with your own availability?
Well, let me start with this. Out of all the mental health therapists in America, 80% of them are white. 12% are Latino now, and then now 6% are Black. Out of that 6%, probably about 95, 96% are women. So then if you think about trying to find a licensed Black male therapist, whether you're heterosexual or not, you're probably looking at a 1%er. And that's a staggering number because especially after COVID, the need for mental health increased drastically. So yes, am I in high demand? Of course, I get calls every day. How do I navigate that? Well, I do have a referral list. I have one of my buddies, his name is Calvin Thompson. He works in the same suite as me, Black male therapist. So if I don't have any room, I'll shoot him a client, or he'll shoot me a client. Or let's just say I have someone that says, hey, I don't have any room, I'll shoot them to one of my other colleagues, Maria or Charlene, or whoever I may have in my database. So I try to find the best fits for the client if I'm unable to see the client. And like I said, there's only one me. And I try to take as many as I can. I try to do it, but I also got to look out for my own mental health and self-care, right?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because, I could imagine, and what I did not know was, let's say, like, of that 6% that you mentioned who were African-American, about 95, 96% being African-American women, I could imagine then the males who fall within that other 5 or 4%, because of that, onslaught of potential folks who want that specific demographic as a therapist, that could be taxing in and of itself for the individual therapist. And that's one thing that I don't know if people talk about enough. I had one young lady, Kimberly, mentioned that in season 1 about how you all as mental health therapists need to take care of your own mental health as well. So who's there to support you all, right? And so that's always an interesting dynamic that I'm happy that you mentioned. One of the things I noticed that your practice also focused on was, and you mentioned you're dealing with kids and children, was really childhood trauma, right? And I'm actually going to be running a race soon, helping support those impacted by childhood trauma. And what I noticed was that more than 2/3 of children reported at least one traumatic event by age 16. So tell us a little bit about what childhood trauma is or can be, and how, when it's left unresolved, it really can affect adults.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell people, show me a child that's 16 years old, and I can show who this child is, who this child will become as an adult. Why? Because a lot of things that adults that we're facing right now, or the feelings that we may have, or things that we may be dealing with, are because of things that happened in our childhood. So childhood trauma can look different for anyone. It can be anything from being bullied, or constantly being called stupid, or witnessing crimes, or sexual abuse, physical abuse. It's a wide range, but it's all about how this child responds to the stressor and how it affects him or her. And then nowadays, kids, when they don't have an outlet, they start to harm themselves, whether they start cutting, talking about suicide. And it's one of those things where when kids go through traumatic experiences and it goes unresolved, it can look differently. For instance, let's just say your parents, like a divorce, that's a traumatic experience. Let's just say your parents divorce, get a divorce, and you're like 8 years old or whatever. And so now, your dad leaves and, he's upset. You guys are now he's going bouncing from house to house to house. Now he sees the mother dating another man, the dad's dating another woman, and there's constantly shuffle in that dynamics. That can ultimately lead to sometimes a kid having inconsistent relationships going forward. Why? Because of what they witnessed, what they saw, the constant arguments. I always tell people, like, between the ages of like 2 and I would say 2 and 10, those are like tender years for a child. This is when, I always say that parents are our kids' first teachers. So essentially the things that we go through, we're essentially imprinting ourselves, our values, our beliefs onto our kids. So a lot of things that happens in that time period does affect them going forward, especially if they go unresolved.
And so one of the things that I love about the show, and I always, kind of end in these spaces around advice, right? And I think during this mental health month, it is definitely important. We talked about earlier, the importance of why representation is important, in this space. And so for people searching for a therapist, what advice would you give them on selecting the right person for their needs?
It's kind of like going on an interview. You have to vet the people who you contact. Just because I'm a Black male doesn't mean I'm the right therapist for your son or daughter. You have to ask the right questions. Ask them what do they specialize in? Have they dealt with, like, they can even start telling the therapist about what's going on with their child, and if they believe they'll be a good fit. Personality wise, do you feel like this therapist is going to be able to connect with my child or not? And sometimes, if things don't work out, don't force the issue. Just try to find another therapist. Be open to accountability. I'm a therapist, and I tell people, I said, look, I'm not one of these therapists who always agrees with you. I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, you're right. No, I'm a therapist that holds my clients accountable for things that they do and the things that they haven't done that we spoke about. I call a spade a spade. And so for parents, yes, I always say representation matters, but finding the right representation is key. Do your interviews. Sometimes I'll have parents that say, hey Charles, like, hey, thank you for meeting with me. I do have interviews with 2 or 3 other therapists. And I always tell them, I say, I'm glad that you're doing that. I want you to find the best help for your son and who you feel the most comfortable with. And I always tell them, I say, even if you don't choose me, just let me know that you found someone good, that you found someone, and I'm okay with that. And of course, if things don't work out, I'm always here.
Right. No, that's important. And, during Mental Health Awareness Month and BIPOC Mental Health Month, how can we help to amplify that it's okay to seek help in these spaces?
I try to tell people all the time, I said, everyone goes to therapy now. You have athletes, you have actresses, you have doctors. I've had surgeons before. I've had lawyers, high execs in different IT companies. My thing is, everyone's coming for therapy. So I just don't want people being afraid that, being afraid to share, like, what's going on with them. I'd rather them share, try to get the help so that they can move forward in an effective way. If not, then you'll be trapped in your own, I guess you can say, your own prison in your mind, where you just continue going through the same thoughts, the same feelings, and you will never end. It will just be an ongoing process that never gets taken care of. I always say, treat yourself, don't cheat yourself. Take care of yourself first. And part of that is your mind. Think about it like this. If you had a heart issue, would you not take your medications for your heart? If you were diabetic, would you not take your insulin? If you had some other things going on in your body, would you not do what the doctor asked you to do? So why not? Why don't we take care of our mind? It's the biggest, most important thing that we have. It's the thing that allows us to function. I have people who refuse to take medication. They're bipolar. They refuse to take medication. Why? I've always said schizophrenics, bipolar, the best treatment for that is therapy with medication compliance. Why not? Why don't you want to take care of your mind? You want to take care of everything else? Why not your mind?
When you put it like that, it makes so much sense, right? And so, no, I'm glad you used that analogy. And so, lastly, what type of impact are you hoping to have on your clients in the future?
One of the things I really love about therapy is the gratification that I get from the parents or the kids or even young adults that say, "Hey, man, thank you so much for allowing me." Sometimes the therapists, we have to help the clients connect the dots on why certain things are happening, and then find a way on how we can navigate through these different stresses or resolve these issues. Therapy isn't a lifetime thing. It shouldn't be. So when I see clients making progress, I start stepping back. If I'm seeing them weekly, I start seeing them biweekly. Once we start seeing then I go from biweekly to monthly. If there's still no issues going on, then I graduate them and I congratulate them for the hard work that they put in. Because ultimately, therapists shouldn't be working. So therapists should not work harder than the client. We see them once a week. The other days, the clients have to be able to, follow through with the things that are suggested by the therapist. So when I see clients actually doing the work, that's really gratifying for me. And seeing their, I call like a character in the movies, they call it like a character arc. When you watch a movie, the main character starts off one way, and then you see them like change into something different, and then the character arc changes. The same thing in therapy. When I see the change, I'm like, okay, they're on their way, and I feel good about it.
Oh, that's great. Well, Charles, look, I want to thank you for taking some time to speak with me today. I'm glad we found each other on LinkedIn. I love learning more about you and your practice. I would love to stay in touch as well, and would love for you to share where can our listeners really find and support some of the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. You can find me on, go to my website, www.customlifesolutions.com. You can find me on Psychology Today, Charles B as in boy Walker. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, Custom Life Solutions. You can email me at cwalker@customlifesolutions.com.
Perfect. So thank you for that info. I'll make sure I put that in our show notes. So look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank my guest, Charles Walker, for joining me today. Like I said, I'll share his information in the notes, and I hope you all have a great week, and we'll definitely see you next time. Charles, thanks again, man.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.